Today we're talking about the sign of Capricorn, which occurs every year between approximately December 21st and the new year, January 20th. Each year it may vary by a day depending on how the axis of the Earth is shifting, but generally speaking it is around that time. And the sign of Capricorn always begins at the time of Winter Solstice. And Winter Solstice, as many of us know, is the shortest day of the year, and there is a great significance attached to that in the fact that if we think about winter and we think about how cold it is, at least in the northern hemisphere, at that time it gets dark very early and it is a long night. And always at that time we have the holidays like Hanukkah and Christmas, and we have lots and lots of lights. What a lot of people don't realize is that this is a much older holiday than just Christmas or Hanukkah. This is a holiday that really reaches very far back into ancient times at the time of the pagans, when they too would realize it was the longest night of the year, and they too would begin to celebrate because the day after winter solstice, slowly but surely, the days would get longer, and then they would have sun to feed their crops. So they would always celebrate at this time of the year, and it was called the Festival of the Return of the Lights, and they would celebrate by eating a great amount of food and dance and ritual and prayer. And we carry that now into modern day, into Christmas and Hanukkah, where we still have lights. We have lights on our Christmas trees. We have lights on our menorahs. We have lights on our houses. We have candlelight. In fact, one of the most wonderful gifts you can give at Christmas are candles, or bring them to someone's home for light. And so it's very significant when we talk about this because, unfortunately, in a lot of the popular astrology magazines and books, when you read about the sign of Capricorn, you don't hear too much about light. You hear things like they're very ambitious, they're very dull. And personally, I don't like hearing those kinds of things because I know a lot of really warm and loving and light-filled Capricorns. And what it really means, if we look at that, is that this is the point at which the year begins to turn. The Native Americans celebrate this point in the year as their new year. Capricorn is the point of conception in the zodiac. The symbol for Capricorn is the symbol of what we call the Seagoat, and many of you have seen the Seagoat. He had a tail, or she had a tail, and the body of a goat. And the reason they use that symbol is because the Seagoat, the ancient mythological beast, would have kind of like two lives, and it would begin at the bottom of the ocean and slowly but surely swim to the surface of the earth. And when we say slow here, we really have to look at the word slow, because Capricorn energy, people have a lot of Capricorn in their chart. They don't have to be a sun sign in Capricorn, but they can be a person who has Capricorn rising, which is based on the time that you're born, or they can have a lot of Capricorn planets in their chart. If there's a lot of Capricorn, they may appear on the surface to be slow, but they're not slow. They're taking everything in and they're assimilating it. And the Seagoat would do just that. He would swim to the surface very slowly, and then when he reached the surface where the earth began, he would then begin to climb to the very, very top of the mountain. And he would always go it alone. He really didn't have much company, which is very typical of Capricorn. They usually go it alone. And this is symbolic of the two lives of Capricorn. The first half of life, which is usually lived in the unconscious, because water symbolizes the unconscious. The second half of life, after they've gone through certain lessons and they've become aware of certain things, and we will be discussing this further on, is the time of consciousness, when they really begin to achieve the top of the mountain, to get to the place that they've always dreamed of being. And that's why the Seagoat is probably a more appropriate, it's a much more sensitive image than a goat too, because it has an element of a fish who's very delicate, and who, if you look at it here in this part of the water, it really is over here. So there's tremendous mystery associated with this sign that a lot of people don't really realize. It's what we call an earth sign. There are 4 elements in the zodiac. There's earth and water, which is a more grounded kind of energy, more organic kind of energy, and earth is very organic. And there are also the fire and air elements in nature, as there are in astrology, which are a little bit more intuitive and sparky and on the go, and they don't stay around for very long. But the earth types do. The planet that rules the sign of Capricorn, and each planet rules a certain sign. And it's very interesting to really look at these planets, because these planets hold the mythologies and the stories and the threads and the psychological pieces that each sign of the zodiac holds. And the planet that rules the sign of Capricorn is the planet called Saturn, which is one of the visible, very large but very visible planets in the sky. And we need to talk a little bit about Saturn because in mythology, he was the god Kronos, and we will be talking about Kronos much further on. But the one thing I want to say about Kronos right now is if you translate the word Kronos or Chronos into Greek, that means time. And time is a major issue with Capricorn people. They never have enough of it. They never have enough of it. They seem to squeeze in all kinds of appointments in between other appointments. They need one more day, or they need a lot of time to think about things. Time. They never seem to have enough time. And it's just so perfect because each year when the holidays arrive and Capricorn, the sign of Capricorn, is arriving around December 21st, what are people concerned with right before Christmas? Am I going to have enough time to buy presents? Am I going to have enough time to make the dinner? Am I going to have enough time? And they run around like people who really don't think, trying to just get it done. And so by the time Christmas comes, people are exhausted, or Hanukkah comes, people are exhausted. So time is a major concern. And in fact, this is a group that works very well with the concept of time. This is a group that would have a real sense of timing, who, if they're working in an industry where they have to predict things or where they have to figure out scheduling, they would do very well. This is an industry. Kronos, the god Kronos, was the god that was responsible for social order. And so this is a group of people that are very good at organizing and managing and administrating and putting the right people with the right people and making the job get done. And the other thing about them, though, very much like Kronos and very much like the goat, is very often they do it alone. The one thing that's very unique about this particular group of people, if you're going to tag the word loners to any group, this would be a great group to tag that to, because they are loners. A person who has a lot of Capricorn in the chart doesn't really need a lot of people around. They need to have their mate or their family. That's very important to them, and their job. And that's basically it. They may have one, maybe two very dear friends. But most of the time, they enjoy being alone. And as they get older, though, and as they pass 45, because for some reason it seems in the years that I've worked with astrology that the 45th year for people who have a lot of Capricorn in the chart is the year where really their life begins to turn around. This is the group out of all the signs of the zodiac that we call the late bloomers of the zodiac. These are the ones that really don't start living their life until they pass 45. And the reason for that, and this will move into part of the mythological section here, but it's important we do this, is that this is a group that's very much also concerned with the issue of survival. Now, there's a wonderful book written many years ago by a man whose name was Edmund Van Dusen. He was the former science editor for Fortune magazine, and he wrote a book called Astrogenetics. And basically what the book was about was looking at careers and professions and looking at which sun signs showed up with certain professions. That really wasn't the part of the book that I recall really fascinated me. What fascinated me was the analogy that he had to prehistoric times, because he was talking, and he was using the sign of Capricorn as an example. He was talking about how in the dead of winter in prehistoric times, a child that would be born at the time of winter, which in the northern hemisphere is the coldest time, and would be born in the cave, would have a lot more to do with issues of survival. That child's family, that child had to learn to not only get up out of a cold night and go out into the cold wilderness and find food under the ice and be very clever about doing it, but they had to survive the winter. So his thought was that if this in fact was true, that inside of each group born at certain times of the year is this feeling, this emotional memory of survival. Like if somebody's born at this time of the year, the emotional memory would be about survival. Now that's appropriate because the planet Saturn, Kronos, also rules what we call the root chakra. There's a system called the chakra system in the body. There's actually hundreds of thousands of chakras in the body, power points, energy points in the body. There are 7 major chakras. Many people have written about them, and they run from the tailbone all the way to the top of the head along the spine. And the very, very base of the chakras is the root chakra, and the root chakra is associated with Saturn, and the root chakra is associated with grounding, which is very interesting because we're dealing with an issue or a sign of the zodiac that's very involved in is very grounded group of people. The root chakra is at the base of the spine where the tailbone is, at the very bottom. And when a lot of people do meditation work or they sit quietly in the room, they say, now ground yourself. And many meditations will say, take a cord from the bottom of your spine and in your imagination, run it down into the earth and anchor yourself. So this is Saturn rules this part of the chakra system. But Saturn and the root chakra are psychologically associated with the issues of survival and fear. That's another key word here, because one of the dark sides of Capricorn is fear, is either being very creative out of fear, which is the best way to work with it, or being caught in fear and depression. And this is one of the big challenges in their life, is moving from fear and depression and moving on into being very creative from it. So fear, survival, and also creativity out of survival issues is a real strong piece of this. And that's what we have to look at when we look at the story of the prehistoric child in the cave, is that this child or this child's family not only had to survive, but they also had to be pretty creative. They had to kind of know where the food was under the ice. They had to know the timing of when the herd would come through. And out of that survival issue, they could do wonderful, miraculous things. And this is something that a lot of people don't write or talk about when they talk about Capricorn, is that Capricorn can actually be one of the most creative signs of the zodiac, particularly when economic times, particularly when business is having a very difficult time, as the economy has been doing for the past years. This is a time of tremendous creativity out of need. There's an old saying, if life hands you lemons, you make lemonade. I think probably a Capricorn invented that one, because when they're at their worst point, when they're at the most down period, is when they become the most creative. And this particular group of people during times of survival in society does the best. In fact, in terms of success in business, they're usually more successful during times of survival in the industry and in the economy. Sometimes when the economy is doing too well, they may not do as well. They sort of lead the pack when the times get tough. And so this is one of the beauties of Capricorn. Now, at a very young age, as with all children, they are very sensitive and innately a very creative being, as is with probably any child that's born under any sign of the zodiac. And the issue, however, may be that emotionality was not recognized in the family. Now, what I'm about to say, I'm not going to say this for us to be angry at our parents or our mothers or our fathers or our relatives, but to think about the experience if you are a Capricorn, if you've had this experience. This sign is particularly concerned with an unavailable father, and when the mythologies are explained, that will be explained in a little bit more detail. The unavailable father, or the absent father, or the father that felt like sometimes it's the mother, but oftentimes it's the father that felt to the child as if the father was going to devour the child in some way. And so what the child begins to do is it builds this crust around itself that works. And the child then moves into scheduling themselves and becoming successful in school and signing up for everything. And they're ambitious. This is an innately ambitious group of people. They want to be successful. They want recognition in society. And this works for them, and they work very hard, and they put up with a lot, and they'll work longer and harder than anybody else. They'll put up with more either verbal abuse or whatever kind of abuse more than anyone else, because they are the sign of discomfort. I mean, they're born in the dead of winter, in the cold. And then all of a sudden they hit about 40 or 45 years of age, and suddenly that methodology or that way of being doesn't work anymore. Everything's going askew. Relationships suddenly aren't working. Or suddenly there's a realization that one is lonely, that they have no one except their work. There's different ways of looking at it. And then what begins to happen is, as the midlife transition begins, and all the outer planets begin to become active in the horoscope, as they do for everyone, it doesn't matter what sign of the zodiac they're born under, when you hit 40 to 45, midlife hits you. What happens is they start to realize that their old methods aren't going to work anymore. And so what they start to do is the crust begins to crack. And then what starts to happen, if they are brave enough to go through with this, because here's where free will comes in. Here's where choice comes in. You can choose when you come to midlife. It doesn't matter what sign you are. You can choose when you come to midlife whether you want to continue to be the way you've been, which ultimately leads to unhappiness, or if you really want to make some change in your life. If the brave Capricorn person, especially the Capricorn personality who's built this fortress of solitude around themselves, of crust, says, this isn't working, I've got to make a change, then they have to start addressing their emotions and their feelings. And this is the point in life, and really, ultimately, this is the very first time in life, close to the 45th year. Sometimes it happens at 40, sometimes it'll happen at 50. It oftentimes does not happen before 40, that they begin to address emotions and invite the emotions in, and that's an entire new realm of experience that they've never really allowed in, because if you allowed emotions in, then you might not be safe and you might not survive. And once they start to integrate the emotions and the feelings, the crust begins to fall off. And as the crust begins to fall off, they become happier, and they become younger, and they look younger, and they start to really move into what they came here on this earth to do, their stride. They begin to reach their stride. And this is why we oftentimes say with Capricorn people, or people who have a very strong Saturn in the chart or a lot of Capricorn, is that they are like Merlin, the magician, in the stories of King Arthur. Merlin grew younger and he grew backwards. And Capricorn does it. As they get older, they get younger. And as they get older, they get younger. And what happens, they usually end up living quite a long time, physically living a lot longer, because it took them so long to start living. You oftentimes hear the saying, the old goat. Somebody who was a Capricorn probably invented that one too. They live to be very old, and oftentimes 80, 90, 95, and these are the people that you'll read about in the newspapers that are doing marathons, 26-mile marathons at the age of 90. This is a person who has a lot of Capricorn, who has, in fact, invited at the age of 40 to 45 or 50, whenever, the emotions back home. And also has resolved issues with family and parents, especially with fathers, resolved the father issues. This is a very dutiful group of people. These are people that are very responsible. If you want to hire somebody to get the job done and get it done well and get it done with quality. And this is a key word here. There's quality versus quantity. The Capricorn personality would rather save all their money to buy a Rolls Royce maybe once in a lifetime than buy a series of smaller, less expensive cars. These are the people that if they buy something, they buy the best, and they're willing to wait for it. These are the people who, if they offer a service or do a service for an individual or have a business, their service will probably be the most expensive. It'll cost the most, but they will have a service that will have a longer lasting effect than something that you buy and then it's finished. And that's something to be said in the times we've been in the economic times we've been in. There's been a lot of inflation. There's a lot of things that have gone up in price. And there's services and there's services, and there's clothing and there's clothing, and there's supplies and there's supplies. What we could be seeing in the years to come and in the years past, as the economy is shifting and changing, is that people are still spending money, but they're spending money on something that's going to last longer, that they don't have to spend money several times on. And this is very associated with the sign of Capricorn. Another thing that's very associated with the sign of Capricorn, as well as its ruling planet Saturn, is the concept of wisdom. Capricorn is associated with the north and the ice and the cold. We talked about that when we talked about prehistoric times and crawling out of the caves into the snow. And the place of the north in the Native American traditions is the place where the wise ones are. The wise old men and the wise old women, as well as the animals that are associated with wisdom, like the white buffalo or the gray buffalo, and the white owl or the gray owl. And the color, it's very interesting, the color it's associated with Capricorn is the color gray. In fact, they have a tendency to pick darker, less vivacious colors, grays, browns, navies. There's a more subdued quality about their choices in color. And we need to explore the concept of wisdom here, because wisdom is what comes after living and after experience. And there's, in the Native American traditions, there's the lodge of the grandmothers and there's the lodge of the mothers. In other words, what happened in many of the Native American tribes is when a woman was of birthing years, she was in her fertile years, and she would have her monthly menses, each month when she would have this, she would go to what they called the moon lodge, which is perfect because the moon is the planet that's associated with the sign of Cancer, which is the sign that's opposite the sign of Capricorn. And in the Moon Lodge, and when we talk about Cancer, we talk more about this, the women would go every month and have their visions come back and share them with the tribe. And that was necessary in order to help the tribe perpetuate their ideas and thoughts. But as the women became older and they moved into menopause and they no longer had a monthly menses, then what would happen is they would then go to what they called the Grandmother's Lodge. And the Grandmother's Lodge was really the ruling council or the judging council. And Capricorns associate with judging and ruling and justice and deciding on things. And it's very definitely one that perpetuates the social order. And the Grandmother's Council would be the one that would be literally the elders, one of the groups of elders of the tribe that would decide on whether a chief would stay or a new chief would come in, because now the blood had gone inside and their power was in their wisdom. And so whenever we talk about Capricorn, especially as they get older, we see a real strong level of wisdom that's associated with this, much like the Egyptian image of the crocodile. The Egyptians used the crocodile as a symbol of long life and old age, and the crusty shell, the crusty skin. It's very interesting. Capricorn, ruled by Saturn. Saturn is the planet that rules the skin or the body covering. And so Capricorn individuals, people who have a lot of Capricorn or strong Saturn, will oftentimes have a thicker skin. Many times it'll be large pored. Many times it'll have kind of like an olive yellow kind of quality to it, because each sign of the zodiac has a body type. Many times the bone structure, and it's very interesting because Saturn also rules the bone, the bones, the teeth, the joints, the elbows, and many times their bone structure will be much thicker and much more dense than other signs of the zodiac's bone structures. One of my very old teachers, one of my first teachers, used to say to me that the energy of Capricorn, the Capricorn child will come in, and because their life is filled, they're very sensitive. Remember the image of the Seagoat that's in the water in the beginning of life, the unconscious. They're very sensitive. And a lot of heavy psychic input hits them during the life. The way they experience is traumatic. And if they didn't have that dense bone structure to stand up against that intense barraging of energy, they could crumble. And so they're given this body that's usually very, very strong. If you have stress, if you're experiencing stress, if you're not able to deal with your stress, one of the areas that'll start affecting you will be like your teeth will start to go bad. Fillings will fall out. Sometimes you'll start to have things with arthritis. Elbow joints will hurt. Knees are very much associated with the sign of Capricorn. And you'll notice as Capricorn people get older, if they haven't made changes and if they've stayed fairly stubborn in their concepts and ideas, one of the areas that they may have problems with is their knees. And that's rather symbolic because you have to have your knees to support your legs. The knees are the support system of the legs. If they're in a psychic way, if you're not feeling like you're getting any support, what's the first thing that's going to go? Is the knees. And so if that's starting to act up, it's good to look at your life and inspect it and view it. Now that's easy to say. It's not so easy to do being a Capricorn, because Capricorns, they're very loving, but they're not exactly what I would call the people who catch the subtleties of life. Other groups of the zodiac may be much more astute when subtle things are said, whatever. Capricorns don't usually get it. You talk about the goat who has that thick-headed, goats. What do goats do? They're always butting their heads against each other. They're pretty thick-headed. I mean, if they get a notion in their heads that they want to do something a certain way, even if somebody's given them the reasons why they shouldn't do it, they're going to be real thick-headed and do it anyway. And so in order to get through to them, sometimes you have to take like a psychic club and hit them over the head to get them to just pay attention to you. And so when dealing with a person that's a Capricorn who you care about, you may feel like you're not getting through to them. And it may not be that they don't care. It may be that you're being too subtle and that you need to be a lot more direct and much more forward than you would expect someone to be with yourself. They will then go, "What? Did you say something?" And they'll respond to you and you can get things done. And the other thing about Capricorns too is they will get things done. But in the earlier part of this discussion, I was talking about how we had to remember slow. We talked about the goat. Goat was slowly coming out of the water and slowly climbing to the top of the mountain. Well, the thing about them is they may appear as if they're not getting anything done or it's slow, when in reality they're gathering the information, they're gathering it and they're taking it in, they're assimilating, they're chewing on it, they're thinking about it. And then once they feel really comfortable with the information or what they have to do, then in a very short time, and this is pretty typical of people born under the cardinal mode, they'll get it done. And it'll get done quickly, and it'll be finished, and it's on with a new project. But the appearance may be as if nothing is going on. So it seems slower, and you need to have more patience with this group of people because they do things in their own time. And if you try to push them, very much like the goat is probably one of the more stubborn animals that's out there, okay? Either it'll just put its heels in and not do anything, or it will do exactly what it does in nature. It'll climb to the top of the mountain without you or with anyone else and be perfectly happy. And so this is a good thing to know about them. Now, if we talk about some of the stories, which we now tie in a lot of what we've been saying with the sign of Capricorn, and I've been alluding to this story quite a bit, and it's time to talk about it, we have to really look at the story of the god Saturn or Kronos. Now, Kronos, as I said earlier, is the god that ruled time. And actually, it's a little deeper than that. Kronos was one of the Titans. And Kronos was one of the first string of Titans in Greek lore or Greek mythology. Before Kronos were two people, his father, who was Uranus, the lord of chaos, the sky god, and chaos is a key word here, and the other person was, of course, his mother, Mother Earth, Gaia, Gaia. And Kronos had several brothers and sisters, and they were all here to serve a certain purpose. The difficulty was, though, they were not really being allowed to, shall we say, in modern terms, self-actualize, because they really didn't have a father who really wanted to have anything to do with them, and Mother Earth, Gaia, was pretty upset with the father and decided, well, in order to perpetuate order and to perpetuate civilization, Uranus has to really be out of the picture. And the one child that volunteered to come forward to destroy his father, and again, this seems to be an ongoing theme in myth, was the god Kronos. And he did. He killed his father Uranus. He killed chaos. And what began to happen at that point is Kronos stepped into the position of organizer. And out of chaos began to grow order. And Kronos, and this is part of the story we have to remember because there's some negative things about Kronos, but there's some very good things about him. He was able to build the society. He helped set up the rules. He helped set up a structure to the way things should be. He built the buildings. It's very interesting because Saturn, the planet Saturn, is very much associated with the real estate and the building industry. You see a builder, he or she usually has a very strong Saturn. And so he really did a good job. He organized the world, systems began to be implemented, and was doing very well. Then a prophecy came, and the prophecy said that very soon Kronos, Saturn's time would be over, and it would be time for another child to step into the position of king and be in charge. And this is where Kronos kind of slipped up because he didn't want to have anything to do with someone else taking over. He wanted to stay in control. And so what he decided to do is he decided to eat his children because that would ensure that his position would stay the same. And so his wife, Rhea, began to feed him all his children. But right at the very end of that feeding frenzy, she changed her mind, and she took the last child and quickly took that child, Jupiter, Zeus, and hid him away in a cave. And what she did is she took a rock. It's a very interesting image because Saturn rules rocks and bones and hard things. And she wrapped this rock in a blanket, and Kronos ate that. Saturn ate that and thought that he had eaten all his children and his power would be ensured. Well, as the story goes, Jupiter, Zeus, grows up, comes back at the point that he's a grown man, and he says to his father, "Hey, Dad, you know the prophecy about a son taking over? Well, it was true, and I'm here to take over." And of course, they get into it at that point, and they begin to argue and fight and claw at each other, and really, it was a fight to death. And finally, at a certain point, something snapped inside of Kronos' awareness, and this is key. He was being basically hit over the head with a club. Something hit him saying, you know, maybe my son's right. Maybe I need to step down. Maybe I need to hand over the power. At which point Kronos steps down, and now Jupiter, Zeus, is the person in charge. At this point, when Kronos steps down, in other words, the club has hit him over the head, he's gotten it. He's kind of like gotten religion. He realizes that this was wrong. He returns all the children back to their proper place. And now he's considered to be the god of wisdom. And he grows wise, the wise old man. And you see the image every year as the new year comes in and the old year is ending. You see the old man with the scythe. That's kind of like the old man Kronos, Father Time, saying goodbye to the year and saying, I'm allowing the new year to begin, and I'm taking with me my work, and I'll help be there as a support or as a mentor, which is very often when you see people who have a lot of Saturn in their charts, especially as they get older, if they've really worked through their life and balanced it out, they are very good mentors. They're there as good teachers for people because maybe they didn't have them themselves when they were growing up. And in some of the stories, actually, I've read this upon occasion, in some of the stories, he actually becomes Santa Claus, which is a real jump if you think in terms of the story itself. And there are some old stories that actually move him into that position. So that's the story of Kronos, Saturn, Capricorn. Father issues, the experience of maybe being devoured by the father. Maybe as they've gotten older, they reunited and they understood each other better. This is pretty much a theme in a Capricorn's life. And it's the theme of wisdom, and it's the theme of basically gain through pain, is that, once you have the experience and you've gone through it, you can pursue. Now, there's another side, too, to Capricorn, which is somewhat similar to the sign before Capricorn, Sagittarius. And it's the other part of Capricorn, which is really related to the animal spirits in the animal kingdom, the goat, the lusty goat. In the tarot, there's a card. It's a card that's a Capricorn card, and basically the representation in that is bondage to the material. There's a very strong affinity with this group of people to be bonded to the material world. In other words, they many times, especially if they're ambitious and they're really in the world and they really want to make it, they will equate their material wealth as a measure of their success. And very often, very similar to Scorpio, there'll be quite a bit of wealth as they get older because that's been part of their criteria in terms of their ambition. And there's also the other quality, if you look at the goat, the tunnel vision quality. Now, Pan was one of the characters. This is why we say he's associated with Sagittarius sometimes too. He's a lusty character. He's wild and he's in the field. And Capricorn is like that. Every month we have the moon moving on a 28-day cycle. And every month for a couple of days, the moon moves into the constellation of Capricorn. And I had a teacher once who used to call that the drinking moon, because Capricorn is very associated with lustiness and ribaldry and having a good time and maybe overindulging occasionally. And many times people who have an alcohol problem, similar to Pisces. Pisces and Capricorn, the fish, the seagoat's tail, sometimes there's an alcohol issue here. And this is one of the areas of the life that really has to be watched and looked at. So there's that lusty side of Capricorn, that very earthy, organic side, very sexual side. And so we associate that with it too. So there's those two sides that are very severe, the real staid, traditional, unfeeling, cool, detached, stern quality that may sometimes come through. And then there's this other side that's lusty and outrageous and has this incredible sense of humor. Capricorn humor is a very dry, to the point kind of humor. In fact, Capricorn is associated with clowns, which is very interesting. And if you watch clowns or comics or comedians, you'll see that they have this real dry approach to the way they do their humor, which really is a slice of life, but it also has a cutting side to it too, which makes us laugh at ourselves and the situation. And that's part of Capricorn, is this really very dry, very funny, very almost intellectual kind of humor. Then there's another mythology that's associated with Capricorn, and it's not really a feminine mythology, but it's a feminine image, and it's the goddess. Sometimes she's called Hestia, Hestia, and sometimes she's called Vesta, Vesta, and she is the goddess of the hearth. Now, in the ancient skies, in fact, I have a wonderful, she's still a mentor of mine, Wendy Ashley, who's an astromythologist from Maine. She works with the old skies before the precession of the equinoxes occurred, when Aries was really under Aries and Capricorn was really under Capricorn. And under the old skies, one of the constellations that's lined up with Capricorn is the sacred altar that has a fire in the middle of it, and it's called Ara, A-R-A. And this is the sacred altar that has a pole of fire in the middle of it. And if you know the stories of Hestia or Vesta, what ultimately happens is Dionysus is born, and he comes up to take a position up in Mount Olympus, and there really isn't a chair for him. And she willingly stands up to give her seat to Dionysus. And what she then does is she goes to the center of the room where the holy altar is, where the fire is, where the eternal flame is, where the flame that holds the family together is. And she willingly takes on the role of the keeper of the flame. In other words, willing to give up for those you care about your position or your place and serve unselfishly, and maybe not have the recognition or the acknowledgement that you really want if you're a Capricorn type. And so there is this quality too. Capricorn is sometimes associated with suffering, Saturn is not a comfortable planet. If the planet Saturn is moving through your horoscope, which it does for everybody all the time, certain times of your life when it's in a certain position in your chart, that area of your life will feel uncomfortable. It will feel like you may be giving something up where there's delays. And so this is why this myth is very appropriate for this sign, because they're willing to do that. And there's got to be someone that's willing to do that in order for the social order to continue to be perpetuated. They do one thing at a time. They can't do two or three. It's one thing at a time. And Hestia does that. She, with passion and with conviction, she takes care of that fire and she does not allow it to go out.
Hello, this is Georgia Stathis. You've been listening to our archived series, Myths and Signs of the Zodiac, and we thank you. If you like what you heard and you'd like to know more and hear more, please go to our website at starcycles.com, where you can find an assortment of available tools, pieces of information, and things that you can use in your own practice or in your own study of astrology. Again, thank you so much, and we hope to see you soon.